the topic of this webinar is going to be the 10 best kind of proven practices, not necessarily for credit unions managing scholarships, but really for managing scholarships in general. And so the reason why I talk about this is, again, at Review, we talk to thousands of organizations who are doing scholarships and grants and fellowships and award programs. And there's a lot of common questions and trends that we start to see within the space of, how do we do it this way? Or, if you could kind of dumb it down as like a magic genie, like what are the 3 things that you'd recommend that we do? And so for me, like these are the 10 non-negotiable elements that I think go into a program that have to require some type of thought that goes into it, / they have to be executed against. So as we kind of get into that, I'll kind of outline what those 10 things are, and then we'll kind of dive into them in a bit more detail. We'll use also off the side of my page kind of some examples in real time of either current clients who are doing these types of things or kind of visually at what that might look like for you. Again, regardless of what type of tool set or platform that you're using, trying to help kind of connect the dots a little bit about if you're not doing these things, like in practicality, how would you do it? I typically love to block off maybe 30 minutes or so for these webinars and then open up to question and answer. So we'll kind of breeze through a couple of these topics relatively quick, kind of just tease you with the agenda and the items, but then any follow-up discussions that you might have that you want to kind of dive into, absolutely, let's kind of go ahead and do so. So number one thing that we're going to talk about is what I call a proof of process. It's basically a public statement of the who, what, and when. So it all kind of ties down to in these highly regulated industries, these very important programs. When we talk about compliance aspects, the proof of process is basically saying, hey, if you apply to our scholarship, this is what the process is going to look like for you. That's at its core version. But then at the extreme example, it's actually at the very end of the program, being able to publicly showcase and prove that that promise that was made on the front end was actually followed through. At a very, very high level, we started to hear from organizations where applicants were selected for funding or weren't selected for funding, and they would call up the scholarship provider and say, hey, I didn't get a scholarship, but so-and-so did. I know them. I have better grades. I'm a better candidate. Why did you select them the way that you did? And we start to question, well, was it because of their demographic background or their ethnicity or their personal identifying information? Do they have a family friend with them? So the proof of process is basically saying, look, when you apply for our scholarship, you are going to go through a fair, compliant process, and here's the proof of it. The next thing I want to talk about is the application deadline. So far too many times we hear about these programs that have very, very stringent open and close dates when they open up applications. The deadlines are always at like Friday at midnight. And I kind of understand the sense of urgency and the excitement around it. The challenge is that number one is that you don't want to be waiting until midnight to close applications because for a fact applicants are always going to procrastinate. But the number two is it leaves a lot of marketing collateral on the table, which we'll kind of get into. The third piece of discussion is going to be collecting references the right way. What we like to talk about here, reviewers, let's ditch the reference letters. And I'll get into why here in just a moment. And instead shift the conversation to doing reference templates. Again, I'll tell you why. The fourth item for discussion today is going to be AI detection. Look, in 2024, I think we're just at the very, very, very tip of the iceberg of this discussion. We will be doing a webinar again next month when this is the sole topic. But how do we not run from AI and embrace it? But at the same time, like your applicants at Reviewer, we estimate that by the end of the year, over 70% of the applicants are going to leverage AI for scholarship applications, both the application itself as well as essays. So how do you start to identify who is leveraging AI, how much are they using it for, and start to flag those so we can have these meaningful discussions around it? Next item for discussion is going to be the random scholar to review distribution. So again, these next 2 or 3 items are all going to be compliance related, but how do you take your pool of applicants, give it to your team in a fair, non-biased, meaningful way, as well as kind of being cognizant of their workflow management and to not overwhelm them. I'm also going to introduce a concept called a normalization report, which basically starts to identify, if your review team has different demographics of people who are maybe more stingent than others, how do you identify them and then not penalize the applicants who are reviewed by them? Next is going to be the blind judging, so hiding confidential information from the review teams, which leads into the quantitative scoring aspect, so leveraging data-driven score sheets to kind of help justify the results. And then the last 3 items are going to be more kind of housekeeping related, no real visualizations in a reviewer, but it's going to be consolidation. So just because you use a platform to collect applications, go through the review process, you knocked it out of the park, doesn't mean that you should just stop leveraging technology. So scholarship applicant, post-impact surveys, deliverables, things like that, how are you collecting it? And then the last item that we're going to talk about today here is going to be data security and compliance. Because at its core to it, we are in a highly regulated industry. And so how do we make sure that we have all kind of the proven processes and the regulations and the laws being accounted for? So with that said, again, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving on. Any questions, comments, anything on this list that you're absolutely fascinated by that you want me to spend more time on, please do toss it into the chat. But with that said, let's get the ball rolling. So real quick introduction, who are we at Reviewer? As I'm sure you're aware by now, we're a scholarship management software that's been built to kind of power the entire life cycle of a scholarship program from literally start to finish. So everything from like the marketing landing pages to the applicant application intake process to giving program operations teams all of the tools that need to be highly sufficient and efficient, avoiding things like spreadsheets and downloading of documents and kind of keeping things centralized. And then, of course, like the built-in judging and review processes. So why are we an expert to talk about this? So not only we've been doing this for well over 12 or 13 years, but again, to what I mentioned earlier, is that we have thousands of clients all over the world doing things in very different ways, from people like major Ivy League institutions who are running scholarships for their academics, to 1.2 million member nonprofits and associations doing these, to financial industries, to healthcare, you name it. And while nobody does things the exact same way, and while every program is very, very unique in its own nature, there's really three core consistencies. Everybody is collecting applications, everybody has to do something with them, and then at some point a team is going to sit down and they're going to go through a selection process. So at Reviewer, we built these kind of platforms and these tools and this infrastructure in place to kind of power that entire process. It's built by the people for the people. So it's people like yourselves who have been doing these types of campaigns and these scholarships that bring to us kind of these unique use cases. And that's what kind of dictates not just the features that we provide, but also the services. So one of the best parts about my job is on a daily basis, I start to hear about these hot trends in the space or challenges that are affecting these organizations that not only can we hopefully assist with, but then bring awareness to those challenges to people like yourselves on this webinar to kind of help share some of the knowledge. Because at the end of the day, we at Reviewer are a mission-driven organization, and we only work with mission-driven organizations. And so how do we elevate this space in general? So everything that we kind of get into today wasn't just Reviewer saying, hey, here's a bunch of bells and whistles that we think you might want. It's actually people like yourself saying these are the absolute necessities that we do need to run successful campaigns, and these really are challenges that are impacting the space. So long-winded answer. Let's get into the first topic today, called the proof of process. And if you've been on one of my webinars before, you know that I've talked about this almost every single time, and I think it's an absolute critical aspect to running a scholarship. Number one is in these highly visible community-driven campaigns, we have a lot of eyes on us. And so you're right off the bat going to start to get questions around like, what type of infrastructure is in place? Like, how are you running this program to ensure that if somebody, if my son or my daughter applies to your campaign, that they're going to get the fair shake that they deserve? And that's kind of where the proof of process comes into play. And there's really kind of four key elements that goes into it. Again, what is it? It's basically just a public statement that says, look, when you interact with our organization, here's what to expect. When you apply, here's what's going to happen. Here's how you're going to be reviewed. Here's what the dates and the deadlines look like. And then again, the extreme example of this is actually when the programs wrap up, having some type of public statement or transparent showcasing that those processes were in place. The middle ground is when somebody's parent calls up and says, my daughter applied to this scholarship program, but our neighbor received it, not her. Why is that? You can actually go back and say, hey, you know what? Well, here's the proof of process. Here's the score sheet that was filled out. We can actually ensure that that person went through the proper mechanisms. The comment that came out about the Pelican say, yes, absolutely. So the reason why I have off to my right, and we'll kind of get to this in just a second, is I do like to do these split screens where half my page will be kind of discussion points that will follow us along. For the first couple minutes, I think we're largely going to focus there. And then as we go through here, I am going to showcase in real time organizations using Reviewer and actually putting these items into real practicality. Again, not necessarily to showcase Reviewer, but strongly to kind of showcase, if you wanted to kind of leverage any of these elements, like what it could look like for you. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't have showed it right away, because we'll get to it here in a second. But yes, thank you for bringing that up. And again, any other comments or questions, or if we lose connection, please don't hesitate to ask. So as we kind of get into it, again, there's four key elements that go into a proof of process. Number one is outlining of dates and deadlines. So people want to know like what the expectations are going to be, the deliverables as they go, but also like, hey, when is the program going to wrap up? So if you say that my application deadline is going to be at this day and this time, we're going to do phase one review at this time and then announce recipients at this time, we really need to follow through with that, because if not, what's going to happen is you're going to have members or applicants reaching out to you saying, hey, you said the deadline for announcements was last week. I haven't been told anything. Why is that? And that's a bad look on both the organization, but also it's going to create an overwhelming amount of support and questions that you're going to receive. The next two items that go into the proof of process is more process related. So number one is the application process. So if we go to begin the submission, like what are those expectations? Like what do I need to submit? What do I need to start working together? And the other half of that is like once the applications come in, what's going to happen with them? So who's going to be reviewing them? How are they going to be reviewed? What's the scoring parameter? So I can kind of work that back into my application structure. And the fourth piece of that is going to be like the post-scholarship awarding process. So in this use case, it might be like from when people are selected, when funds get dispersed, to post-selection additional deliverables, things like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of walk through at a high level those four elements, and I'm going to show you, I guess, how the application structure might look in Reviewer. So again, the dates and deadlines is relatively self-explanatory. At its core, we just have to know like when applications open and close. If you are going to be having a firm date and deadline, so example, Thursdays at 4 p.m. is when applications close. I'm going to get here in a moment to why I don't like deadlines. But if you are going to use them, then you have to actually stick to them. So having some type of tool or infrastructure in place that will say, look, when you apply, the actual system did lock down at this time. Nobody was able to apply after. That way, we're being fair to those that follow the expectations and the rules. Very similar process goes to the cleansing period. So very few organizations go straight from the application intake to like the formal judging process. Many of them try to give themselves some type of time to sift through them, review them, maybe do a little bit of vetting first. If that is the case, and I just saw this here about a month ago with a rather large program that had like 4,000 applications, where they closed applications at 11:59, and then they opened up judging at 12:01. So they give themselves literally a minute to sift through them, which wasn't going to be feasible. So it's also kind of a self-reflection of like, okay, great. How much time am I really going to need? That way you're not putting yourself under pressure. These programs are not races, they're marathons. So we got to treat them as such. And then the last piece of that is going to be the actual review and selection process. So when applicants apply, like when do they know that they're being reviewed? Are they going to be communicated with throughout that process? Are we going to be providing updates as they progress on? Things of that nature. Again, you don't have to do all these, but those are the four kind of core elements that go into it. Now, as far as the actual submission itself goes, we'll talk a bit more about this towards the end when it comes to like data security and privacy. But the absolute first thing that I want to talk about is like talking a little bit about like the data security when people apply, because it is absolutely a deterrent to your participants and the participation rates. We're talking about these highly confidential forms, right? References, transcripts, PII. And at this time and age, people are so concerned about like their digital footprint and their data security that if we don't have a publicly statement that says we're using a secure infrastructure, they're compliant, they've been audited, your data is not going to get leaked, it's your data, who owns it, all these types of things I'm not going to get too deep into today. Applicants will actually decide not to apply to a program just out of pure fear that their data is going to end up being sold, it's going to be leaked, things like that. The other piece of this too is that from a pure, I guess, engagement perspective and experience is that a lot of times we are asking for things like essays or external file uploads or deliverables. And so instead of surprising our applicants with like, hey, here's what we need from you, why don't we put that on the front end that says when you go to apply, not just here's what the process looks like, but here's the deliverables that we're going to be asking from. That way they can kind of start to work ahead, reach back out to people, get those ducks aligned before they actually begin the application. A lot of times applicants, even with a really great platform like Reviewer, don't like to use it for the entire process. What I mean by that is like the saving and logging it and working on it. They instead like to work offline, pen and paper still, using Word documents, and then come back into the tool, copy and paste things, and then refine it from there. So empower them to kind of, we want to kind of adapt ourselves and work in the environment that they want to work in and not force their hand into a very specific use case. And then just to reiterate, if you are going to be using a vendor reviewer or whoever it is, a lot of times companies like to say that they're compliant or they have accessibility in place, but they really don't. So the industry standard here is going to be something called SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. Just ask your vendor or whatever tool that you're using, like for the report. It's very expensive, a very time grueling process to get it. So they should be proud to give it to you when you ask for it. But with that said, it's like a 70-page document. So also be careful with what you ask for. The next piece is going to be the selection experience. We're not going to look at this quite yet, but it's basically saying when you apply to our scholarship at its core, you're going to get reviewed by this many people. We're going to randomize it. We're going to blind the data. We're going to use score sheets. Again, don't say those things if you're not going to do it, but that's kind of the best practices of randomization, blinding, score sheets, multi-phase review. We're going to lower the barrier for the review time by giving them a much more manageable workflow. Again, it's not just internal, but also for you as the applicant. Like, you deserve to have the proper set of eyes and the proper time given to you to be fair. And so again, making sure that if you are going to have these items listed on your proof of process, that there's some type of tools or infrastructure in place that kind of map one-to-one to ensure that you follow through with it. So I'm going to jump right into reviewer here, and that's going to be collecting of the application. So I am going to kind of showcase, I think I do like the Pelican State Credit Union's application form. I think it's really well structured. But the kind of first thing I want to talk about, and this is the number kind of 2 core best practices, is stop the deadline. Again, it's not American Idol. People are not tuning in at 6 p.m. on Sundays to watch the live finale. Applicants will always procrastinate, and they're always going to wait until the very, very last minute. So if that is the case, then how do we avoid it? Also, from a pure marketing perspective, I think we're leaving a lot on the table. So when I say collect applications 24/7, I mean kind of 2 different things. Number one is actually collect scholarship applications all year, 24/7, 365. The other thing I mean by that is potentially doing what I call like an intent to apply. So if you are going to have firm open and close dates, that's fine. But then for the rest of the year, allow applicants to learn more about the program, offer their insights. It's called a marketing qualified lead for you marketers on the phone, give you their information. That way, when you actually go to open up applications, you have like a list of people that you can market to. Your conversion rates are going to be significantly higher. Typically, if you do reviews either once per quarter or biannually or annually, there's a lot of buzz and celebration once scholarships are awarded, and then things start to die down. So how do you harness that kind of 1-month window post awarding where people are all fired up because they want to be that next kind of cohort that goes through the process? And that's by basically again, collecting applications 24/7, or B, doing that intent to compete. The other reason why I like that is, again, as a marketer, there's no kind of shortage or shyness away from getting people's information. And so obviously, as a mission-driven organization, there's, account signups, that's one thing, but also, you have these education awareness campaigns, these financial literacy programs. You oftentimes have financial products for people at different kind of demographics. And so how do we kind of get these people into our marketing workflow, get that content out to them, build trust, build community trust? And then when we go to open up the applications, we're in a much stronger position, as well as the candidates are also going to be a much stronger, viable candidate as well. Kind of going back to what I was saying, just because you're collecting applications 24/7 does not mean that you're awarding scholarships 24/7. It just basically means you got this giant pool of people ready to go. And then again, once per month, once per quarter, annually, whatever your cohort looks like of when you want to disperse funds, you'll basically say, okay, let's grab the pool of applicants, let's move them into the judging review process, do the selections, and then kind of rinse and repeat that at whatever schedule you decide to go with. It's also great too because depending on like what your audience looks like, you might actually allow people to apply to multiple scholarships. A lot of times you don't allow people to apply for scholarships once they've been awarded one. But you might have a candidate who in January applies. It's a pretty strong application. They were just on the border. They didn't get funding. You offer them insights and feedback on why do they selections the way that they did. And then as the next cohort comes around, that applicant came back, they took your feedback, they updated their profile, and now they got awarded funding. So what a great success story of us providing impact and value to everyone, not just those who are getting selected. With that said, doing this adds an extra layer of complexity. It's absolutely essential that you have some type of tool or infrastructure in place, because it's very likely that now you're actually managing multiple workflows all concurrently at the same time. You have fresh new applications coming in, you have a batch that you're currently reviewing, but then you also have another batch that maybe already were selected for scholarships, and they're coming back and to get feedback from your offer additional uploads or deliverables like impact statements or fund disbursement forms, things like that. So if you're going to go this route, you've got to have your ducks in a row where everything is consolidated. There is no physical way that you can manage this with spreadsheets, emails, and Google Drive. With that said, what does kind of a 24/7 application process look like? So off to my right, I'm going to kind of dive into like what it would look like. Again, this is just to kind of showcase what scholarship application looks like, I'm going to send out this exact use case that you can see the form. But again, it's all about lowering the barrier. So people are going to have a strong, though this isn't Reviewer, this is the Pelican State website. You're going to have a strong brand, strong reputation. So let's leverage that. So a lot of our clients will use their existing websites. And then when they go to apply for the program, it links them from their website to the scholarship portal. So it serves as like a middleman between their website and then the application form. It's also a great place to reiterate dates, deadlines, rules, eligibility, etc. This is also where we put our proof of process. We kind of outline all the steps that are going to go in. And I'd also probably offer to add a download section where you can actually have like a Word document as well of what the scholarship application is going to be, so they can download it and start to work against it. So as we kind of jump into that, I introduced a lot of moving pieces. Again, the ability for people to save, they can log out, they can come back later. If they get selected for a scholarship, having them rejoin their profile and add additional deliverables. So within Reviewer, we simply ask for them to put in like who they are, first name, last name, email, password, and then it kind of drops them into the scholarship application, where again, a lot of times we like to again see both the proof of process here, but also maybe like an e-checkbox or like a compliance e-signature that says, yes, I read your terms and conditions and I'm willing to move on. So that'd be the first page, and then it drops them into the actual scholarship. So a lot of times this will be kind of where your intent to apply might come into place, where you want to start to collect information about like, are they a candidate now for the scholarship? Or are they not even a member? And we need to start to collect parent information and do marketing outreach to them. Once we get through some of those vetting questions, then it drops us into the bulk of the application. Again, my goal here is not to really showcase all we can do at Reviewer, just kind of visualizing a scholarship process. But at the end of the day, we can basically power whatever content or deliverables that you want to collect. So first name, last name, emails, who are they, short answers, essay collections, file uploads. Like Reviewer can power absolutely all of it. I'm trying to jump ahead to a certain section that we're going to freeze and then come back here in a little bit. We want to get into like things like grades or academics. One of the other things I would offer is kind of a little bonus best practice is when you structure your application questions, yes, it's okay to ask for education information, GPA, grades, transcripts, etc. But again, we want to learn more about the person. Who are they? What's their impact on the community? What's their volunteer opportunities? Like, what do they want to do with their lives? So let their personality shine through. Take grades with a grain of salt. Start to collect things like, what are your achievements? What achievements are you most proud of? Again, how many different organizations have you participated with as a volunteer? Tell us more about your community impact. Tell us more about different types of essays, like why should we consider you for a scholarship applicant? Maybe leverage video surveys instead. So instead of doing text-based essays, you do videos. Structure those essay questions in a way that's more about impact versus tell us why you're a great student, right? There needs to be a way to differentiate candidates. At this point in time, everybody has strong grades. Everybody's a volunteer. So what makes that applicant shine? Again, it's kind of a bonus. I will share this form, but that's how I like to structure scholarship applications. I'm probably going to pause right here and we'll come back to it. And this is kind of the external requests, so transcripts, references, and file uploads. But before we go there, let's kind of talk a little bit about why. So one of the most powerful aspects to a scholarship application is multimedia as well as references. Nothing speaks more about the applicant than somebody else. With that said, if anybody on this webinar has ever written a reference, it's extremely challenging. It also poses a significant risk to you when you go to review applicants because it might create data discrepancy. So let me pause and explain what I mean by that. What I mean is that we want to avoid reference letters. I've been asked to write a ton of them, and they're so challenging because number one is that the applicants always wait to the very last minute to let me know, hey, Kyle, I need a reference. So you gave me like 4 hours, and I'm going to be doing this tonight, right? Oh, with my son hanging off my leg while I'm trying to feed him dinner. So I'm not going to be able to give you the time and energy that you deserve to write a reference. Number two is I need to sit down from scratch. I'm going to sit down on my computer at a white piece of paper, and I'm going to start trying to write some type of letter about you. So it's going to have a barrier. I may not actually follow through with it. This is going to sound really bad, but if my wife wrote a reference on my behalf, it'd be so much better than the reference that I write about her. And it's not because I don't love her to death. It's because she's just a much better writer than I am. So is that a fair representation of her, or is it me as the person writing the reference? So to combat this, what we want to do is instead is do reference templates. And that's kind of where off to my right now, you can kind of visualize what's about to happen, is the applicants will put in like who the name and email is of the person writing the reference or doing the unofficial transcript. We want to start that process very early. So instead of doing it after things like the essays and the file uploads, put that on the first page that says, look, you're going to be asked to write a reference, put in who the reference is now, trigger that notification, and then continue on. That way you can work at your own pace, and then they can work at their own pace. So reference gets a notification that says, hey, Kyle, Tony's asked that you write a reference on his behalf. Click here to do so. And instead of clicking on a link to upload a file, which you absolutely can still do, I instead am redirected to what I call a reference template. And that template is critical because it's going to ask, like, what are the 3 to 5 questions that you want that reference to talk about? So put yourself in the shoes of the person writing the reference. No longer am I coming up with something from scratch. I'm basically just filling out a form. You're guiding me through what you want to see written. And then when your review team goes to sit down and go to do a review and selection process, they're actually viewing the same kind of consistent data set amongst all of your candidates. You don't have one reference that's talking about how great of a person they are versus another reference talking about how great of a student they are. It's very, very consistent. Again, when you go to do judging and selection processes, I want you to use scorecards. And so your scorecard needs to map directly to components within the application as well as the reference. And so if you have a letter, it's absolutely impossible to map that to a scorecard. But if that reference is 3 to 5 questions, now that's the 3 to 5 questions that the scorecard is going to follow along with. I'm going to show you at the end what viewing these references look like. But again, off to the right during the application process, I wanted to kind of showcase like what that would look like, where they put in like the name and email of the person. As soon as they press go, notifications get sent off, and then even better, it creates visibility. So both from your perspective as well as the applicant's perspective, we can now start to look at how many outstanding references have been requested. Are they in progress or not? We can send them built-in reminder messages. The applicant has visibility so they can do their own reminders while still keeping this a very private process where they can see if the reference had done it or not, but not necessarily the content within that reference itself. So any questions or comments on that, please do toss in the chat. This is a topic that I absolutely love talking about. I think it's a total game changer with how we're collecting the data, but also how you're managing it. So the next thing I'm going to look at, we're going to kind of jump back over to my little presentation, and we're not going to look at reviewer for this, and that's AI detection. So I'm going to speak broadly on this topic because we are hosting a very dedicated webinar to how AI is going to have an impact in the scholarship space, both from a management perspective as well as a review and selection process, and then also the application side of things. But I do want to offer some insights into the things that we're seeing. So number one is I do feel that by the end of the year, well over 70% of scholarship applicants are going to leverage ChatGPT or some type of AI writing tool. And that's okay. In general, but specifically in scholarships, this is going to be a growing trend. And it's not a bad thing. It's just something that we need to monitor and then also leverage to its full potential. So obviously, as a program operational manager, there's a ton of efficiencies that we at Reviewer can help bring to you by leveraging things like AI. So auto summarizing of applications, things like that, but also from the applicant's perspective, like I almost want to promote it to an extent because writing essays is challenging. And for a lot of people, again, content writing is a skill set that has to be included in the process. You have to reward them on how well of a writer that they are. If we're talking about changing people's lives fundamentally, what they're doing now, and again, this just depends on your demographic, but somebody who is 17 applying for a scholarship is going to be a different person when they're 30. How do we let them achieve their full life potential? And sometimes they're just not great writers, and that's okay. So how do we offer them, like with AI, a framework of like what we think that they should talk about to kind of build that structure, and then from there let them take over, let their personality shine. The concern here though is that they're just going to let the framework go the whole way. They're going to say, dear ChatGPT, write an essay about my scholastic achievements and why I'm a strong candidate for the XYZ scholarship. So that's where we come in at Reviewer. Again, we're not trying to make decisions off this. We just want to make you aware and flag, hey, out of your applicant pool, here's how many people that we think may have used AI tools to write their applications and or also leverage other third parties, plagiarism, ripping off somebody else's application at a percentage level. So this person was 100% AI, this person was 30. That 30 is probably okay, but at least helping you be aware of it. Because right now, I think we're just running blind. Like we have no idea. I think a lot of times we can think we know from the content, but we have no idea. So what does that look like? So here's kind of an example of two different use cases that we can kind of talk about. Off to the left is that we have 100% AI-driven content. So the system reads it, it'll scan the application, it'll scan the content. It could be file uploads, it could be images. Then it says, look, on a percent basis, here's how confident we are that they used AI. And this one's like 100% used AI versus maybe 20%. On the other example, though, we basically, and this is my use case, I pulled content from the reviewer website where it basically said, look, this is up top us writing things. And that has 0% AI concerns. But the whole bottom section we feel is 92% pulled from some other external resource. And here is what the resource is, right? And it tells you what website it was pulled from. So again, we're talking about both kind of plagiarism, but also AI content at the same time. So for you as a program team, as you go through your phase one vetting process, what we're probably doing is saying good candidate, bad candidate. If good candidate, is it authentic? If so, let's move them on. And then from there, that's where we're kind of allocate our time and our energy and our resources to conducting a review process. It's also okay to reach back out to the applicants and say, look, we appreciate it, but we do think that you use AI. We're going to give you a 3-day window to reapply. Please now do so, right? So again, we're not punishing people per se. We're just calling it out. Any questions on that, throw it in the chat. If not, we'll continue on or save them for the end. All right, so this is really the nitty gritty, I think, what we're going to talk about, and that's kind of the non-biased review and selection processes, because at the end of the day, we can collect applications in many different shapes and varieties. We can collect a lot of different types of content, but at some point, we're going to look at that information, we're going to go through a review and selection process, and we're going to change somebody's life. And so how do we make sure that we get from point A to point C in a very compliant, fair, non-biased manner? So what we're going to look at here is creating an impartial review workflow. And again, there's a lot of ways of doing this. There's extreme examples. You know, if you have 1,000 scholarship applications, you're going to be in a totally different kind of workflow than somebody who might have 30 of them, and that's okay. But for one that has 30, how are you now taking into consideration, you know, personal biases? How are you taking into consideration potential conflicts of interest, things like that? So both groups are going to have similar challenges. One might be more dominant from volume, and the other might be more so from personalization. So at Reviewer, what we like to see, I have a bunch of bullets here you can read, but ultimately the core things that we're going to talk about is I want to see random distribution. Going back to the large volume program, there was an organization about a year ago that came out to us that said, you know, we have 900 essays that our team has to read. We have a team of 10 people, and right now I have all 10 of them review all 900. And it kind of just blows my mind because there's no physical way that I personally could read 900 essays. There's also no way that I could differentiate applicant number 1 from number 900. They're all going to start to look the same to me. And there's no way that I gave that middle batch the fair deserving shot that they deserved. So how do we take our applicant pool, divvy it out to your team in a way that monitors workloads, but also from a compliance perspective, avoids biases? So that starts with randomization. So how you do random distribution could be just A, completely random. It could be B, it could be like just saying, hey, you know, each person's going to get 3 submissions. Even though they can do more than that, we just want each one to do 3. You can do it by categories. So you have like a phase 1 vetting team, a final judging team, an interview team, right? There's lots of ways of pooling them together. And that's kind of the way I like to think about it, is somehow creating these review buckets where you have applicants in the bucket and then a team of people in the bucket, and they're the ones who are reviewing one another. But how you get them in there is kind of up to you. So what does that look like in Reviewer? So in Reviewer, obviously from a program operations perspective, I want to start with this dashboard because you don't know what your volume looks like, most likely. Typically, organizations see about 35% increase in application rates just using Reviewer. I would also argue that number goes up way more if you start to do things like intent to applies and collecting applications 24/7. So with that said, how do you know how many readers or review committee members that you might need? And it's all about measuring the progress. So in Reviewer, you can see in real time how many days into your deadlines, how many applications you received of your applications, like where are they? Are they fully submitted? Are they in progress? It's those in progress I want to focus on, because you might think you have enough people reviewing applications, but you got 415 applications who are in progress. If 30% of those come through, you just double the size of your program. You need to find more review team members. So it's a leading indicator to volume. So with that said, let's kind of jump into the actual kind of pairing system. I'm going to jump ahead here just a little bit. Other things to kind of know as I click around. because it is kind of a self-guided tour, is providing visibility on both the number of applicants you received as well as those references. So I introduced that concept earlier where you have a whole bunch of references that are coming in, but you need to now track, okay, how many references have been requested, who are they, how far have they made it. You have to be able to send them reminder messages because much like your applicants, they're also going to procrastinate and things like that. So we're going to come back to some of these here at the very end when I talk about collecting ongoing data from scholarship applicants, as well as kind of reviewing both transcripts and references. But I want to get to the selection process. So in review, we have a concept called buckets. So you add your team either individually or you can upload them. Once they're in our platform, here's kind of that concept called buckets. And I tried to articulate this using like teams of reviewers. I think it's a pretty common approach where if you have multiple scholarships, maybe each one's its own bucket. If you have 3 phases of review, maybe each phase is a bucket. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It could be different scholarship types. If they're donor sponsored, it could be a named scholar. There's so many ways of doing this. At its core, though, you have a bucket called, say, for example, Group A. So you have a whole bunch of scholarship applicants that come into Group A. The next step is to assign that group out to a team. So when Paula, Mark, Judge Judy, and Randy come into reviewer, they're only going to have access to the applicants in the bucket that you've been giving them access to. So at a very high level, we created potentially one way of doing it, where we basically said, look, we got 6 different buckets. Each bucket has 6 different people reviewing it. We're good to go. We can go further than that, though. So if I open my buckets up, it's actually going to show you what's going on. So it shows you in real time a listing of all of your applicants. It shows you the current number of individuals who are reviewing that application and then who those individuals are. So in this use case, we could say, you know what, like for compliance purposes, I want every reviewer to get no more than 6, but no less than 4. Or you could say, you know what, I want every single applicant to get exactly 3 people reviewing it. And basically the system will take your judging pool, auto distribute it back out, and that way it hits those parameters. And then to the extreme example, what we like to see happening is in your score sheets, there's going to be some type of question that says, is there a conflict of interest, right? And if so, we need you to have the ability to override this and say, okay, well, Mark said there's a conflict of interest with Gabrielle. He's golfing buddies with Gabrielle's dad. So I'm going to uncheck her and then reassign her back out to Gilligan. So now we overrode the pairings, and now Mark is only reviewing the 4 people that we told Mark to score. So again, leverage automation as much as humanly possible while still having some type of manual control. Before I go on much further, because we're going to get into the judging, is going to be the blind judging process. I think this is probably the second most critical piece of the conversation of, great, we took all of our applications and we made it, we divvied out to our team in both a workflow conscious manner as well as a random manner. But now we got to make sure that the review team is actually judging the applicant on the merits of their application, not who they are, what their background looks like, who their parents are, and or comparative to other people. That last piece is critical. With this process to work, we don't want to be saying Kyle versus Susie. We want to be saying Kyle on a score of 1 to 10, Susie on a 1 to 10, and let the scorecards raise and lower the applicant volume. So what does that look like? So again, I'd say blinding of data. That means 2 things. One is PII. So first name, last name, email, any identifying information that tells us who the person is, as well as any demographic details that may sway the judges. I hate having to say that, but it's a thing. 2 terrible horror stories of why we exist. Number 1 is that we heard from an organization that collected scholarship applications through email, and a whole bunch of them went to a spam filter. So a team sat down and they actually awarded scholarship funding to high school seniors. 3 months went by and they found a whole bunch of applicants in the spam filter that never got included in the review. They were never even considered for funding. Like, that can never happen again. Horror story number 2 is we started to hear from these organizations that when they would go to do review and selection processes, they found out later on that the review team was awarding scholarships to friends and family. They were awarding scholarships to friends or donors to their nonprofits, right? Like, again, that can't happen. Or they're judging them based off of demographic backgrounds and they're being biased. Like, that just, my blood boiled. Like, these are such critical programs that we're doing. We're changing people's lives that we need to take that stuff into consideration. So again, not just blinding PII, but also potentially harmful information that might impact the results. The other thing that I want to be sensitive to is the time of the review member. So great, we gave them a much more manageable number to review. If your scholarship application, I'm going to make up a number, is 50 questions, but only 6 of them is relevant for the selection process, hide the rest of those questions. Just give them those 6. That way we can avoid overwhelming our review committees. And then again, this is also where the proof of process comes into play. This is why reviewer exists. Like you have to have the infrastructure in place that allows you to do these things because there is no gray area. Like this is just how these programs have to be ran. So in a reviewer, what does that look like? No, reviewer is not blurry. This is just our way of trying to showcase that if there is PII or confidential information, that will actually hide it completely, not just on the menu. So this is when a judge comes in a reviewer. This is like the listing of who they're supposed to review. And then when they open up somebody's application, it shows them the profile. So off to the left, we have what I call like a virtual blinder. And so you'll see in here it has all the demographic details completely hidden about the applicant. The judge can kind of side by side toggle back and forth between score sheets and the application form. They can look at references, which also can be blinded. They can look at the file uploads. They can leave comments. They can leave notes. But ultimately, we're allowing that judge to kind of have an all-in-one system to view content, fill out score sheets, rinse and repeat in a very efficient manner. Which also leads me to the next bullet point, which is going to be actually using quantitative scoring. So by no means do we, want to have pure deliberation-based review processes where a team sits down, they just talk about candidates and pick their favorite. We also don't want pure quantitative scoring either. While you could, because it is a safer bet, sometimes data doesn't tell the whole story. So what we like to see is some type of combination of both, where the review team lays out some type of scorecard. And what I would say is, again, to save your team time, there's tangibles that have dedicated point values that don't require a human to look at. So for example, a 3.5 G paper versus a 2.1. Again, I like score sheets. I like these processes that are more community impacted about the person, not grades, but they're still very important. So with that said, like we can assign point values to grades that get automatically answered on our behalf. So when the judge comes in to review the applicant, they don't even need to look at the grades because a point value already got assigned in real time automatically. What they're doing instead is reading the reference letters, they're reading the transcripts, they're looking at the volunteer hours, and they're reading the essays. But again, we want that score sheet to ideally match your mission and your values. Obviously, I'm going to make up an example here. If you're a credit union with a background on serving military veterans, your mission may be slightly different than somebody who is, working with steel workers, right? And so try to pair those scorecard questions up with what your mission and your vision looks like. The critical piece here, though, is two things. One, the review team needs to be able to side by side view the submission form, fill out the score sheet, have their questions. I also don't love showing judges actual numerical values. So instead of saying rate the applicant's scholastic achievements on a scale of 1 to 10, what I would instead do is say rate their scholastic achievements from poor to exemplary, exemplary being great, right? And then behind the scenes, we are assigning point values, right? So you might have got 2 points for poor, but 10 points for exemplary. That allows math to kind of let people rise the leaderboards, but allows the judge or that review committee member to actually think through why they're scoring the people that they are. Again, the other piece of this is that we don't want them comparing one applicant to another. We want the score sheet to match the application form. They just kind of fill it out, answer the questions as they go. And then once they submit it, the system, in this case, reviewer, in real time builds these leaderboards. So I'll kind of show you that where it'll actually show you a listing in real time of all of your applicants, how they were scored. It'll rank them from high to low, which then basically empowers your team to do deliberation. So again, the score sheet builds rankings, and then your team can kind of talk and they can deliberate about kind of why they score people the way that they did. Any questions that we can kind of come back to that here towards the end. So the last couple of pieces is going to be not necessarily in reviewer, although I am going to show you the consolidation side of things. It's going to be more so just kind of like a philosophy of next steps. So, with reviewer or whatever platform that you might be using, you might be leveraging technology for 90% of the program, but then the last 10% you're going back to using emails, spreadsheets, Google Forms, and documents. So all of that proof of process stuff, all that compliance stuff just completely went out the window. So we want to be able to have some type of vendor or platform that's in place that can do everything from not just the application and taking the selection, but also like the long-term data collection needs of your applicants. It's very common for our clients to do one of two things. Number one is if you're not selected for a scholarship, they give them feedback. They tell them why they were scored the way that they were. That way the applicant has some type of self-development, some type of self-growth and growth opportunities to either reapply next year or find funding sources elsewhere. Again, if you had 100 applicants and you gave a scholarship to 5, those 5 are already well on the way to success. How do we provide value to the other 95? The other use case to this is if you do get selected for a scholarship, you now need to come back and submit, thank you letters, disbursement forms. Some of the scholarships that we work with are tiered. So if it's a 4-year scholarship, the applicant might come back every semester or every year and update their profile with updated grades or updated deliverables. They might be requesting additional funding, right? And so we want to be able to say, hey, just come back into the same portal that you started with and keep adding on to it. So in Reviewer, it's all profile centric. We have Caleb here. Caleb is an applicant. And you can see right after that, I have all of Caleb's content in the center of my page. This was Caleb's initial application form. So we have our essays, our grades, our file uploads. Everything is smack dab in front of me. But then off to the right, I have communication tools. So I can actually one-to-one directly communicate with Caleb. I can leave internal communication about Caleb for my own team. So I might say, unlocked a $5,000 scholarship, waiting for this deliverable for the next triage of it. We can share communication with one another. I talked earlier about managing file uploads. So it doesn't matter if it's a photo or a video or a PowerPoint or a PDF, you name it. Every document gets uploaded and our platform gets embedded. So your team can simply click on it and then boom, it'll open up the scholarship disbursement form that was uploaded in real time. Your team never has to leave the platform. Maybe you want to get a headshot for marketing collateral. You want to announce scholarship recipients. They can just come in here, upload their image, and then boom, you'll notice that it embeds itself smack dab. And yes, that is my son. Yes, he is seeking scholarship funds as a 3-year-old. So if you guys know anybody, but as I kind of move on, I also want to touch on the supplemental forms. I mentioned very early on in this conversation where we're collecting references. Here's how this works, where we have Caleb who submitted a transcript and then Miley submitted a reference. So in that example, Miley would have got notified that said, hey, Caleb has asked me to write a reference on his behalf. Click here to do so. Once that got submitted, I can actually press view. You'll notice that it actually embeds itself right smack dab in front of me. It's also potentially aware if you want them to add additional deliverables, the applicants would just come back into the tool and they would click edit and then add whatever those additional deliverables might be. So 2 last pieces, and then we'll do some more Q&A. I'm just going to fly through these. One's called engagement surveys. You'd be shocked at how many of our clients historically would just use the platform or run their scholarships and then run it the exact same way the next year. That's okay if the scholarship is rock solid, but you don't know. So we want to avoid becoming complacent. You're running this program for a reason, right? It has to match your mission and your vision. So how do we know that we're actually achieving those goals? How do we know that we're actually impacting students' lives? And that's going to be different for everybody. Is it a measurement of how many people were impacted? Is it a dollar amount that was funded? But it has to align with your mission. And then a shockingly kind of big discovery that people don't realize is the snowball effect, where there's a ton of turnover in the space. And so how do we kind of take a program, rinse and repeat, incremental improvements from one year to the next, and let that snowball just pick up and grow and grow and grow, but also not be reliant on one individual person. So if somebody from your staff was to leave, how do we not take 4 steps back and just continue to let the program continue to grow? Let's take care of all right.